Hello and welcome to Voice of Victory. Of course, I'm Adrian Starks, and it's my pleasure to welcome you once again. This is our podcast that we are blessed and enjoying. We pray that this will be something that you incorporate in your rotation of podcasts, if you will. I'm excited today because I have a very, very, very special individual that I've invited, and she said yes. I'm speaking about none other than Dr. Sharon Contreras, the superintendent of Guilford County Schools. And so I say welcome to Dr. Contreras.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, we know that there are incredible challenges facing those people who serve our children educationally. As it is in so many other sectors of society, we have challenges that are seemingly mounting by the day. But before we get to talking about the challenges and all of these other things going on, I think it's important that our viewers, our listeners, have a chance to have an insight about Dr. Contreras. So could you tell us about this individual that so many see and laud about? Well, tell us about your early days, your upbringing.
It's a great question, and I feel like now that I'm retiring, I can be a lot more transparent. But I was born the seventh of 10 children in Long Island, New York. My mother's African American, and my father is Latino. His parents came from Puerto Rico and Venezuela, and I grew up, very poor, actually. So I always tell people and my staff, you have to remember to be proximate to the problem. And if you haven't gone without food, if you haven't had your lights turned off, you just don't understand what many of our children are going through. So I know people see who I am today, but I grew up with that government cheese that would never melt, no matter how many times you put it in the oven or how hot it got. And but my family really valued education because my grandparents were sharecroppers,
right.
And my grandparents on my father's side literally walked down from the Andes Mountains to try to, to get a boat to the United States. They were coffee planters, and they just wanted a better life for their children. And so we were not allowed to play around with school.
Wow. I don't know if you realize this, but there's something, I'm the seventh of 11 children.
Oh, wow.
And there's something really unique and blessed about the seventh child. And I'm not surprised to see that you have, ascended as you have. Because again, there's a grace that many people who delve into numerology and the sort will often speak about. But knowing that your family held education high, is that what drove you to choose education as a career path?
So even though I was raised in New York, the schools were incredibly segregated, probably more segregated than schools in the South are today.
Right.
And so I had a teacher in the Uniondale Public Schools, the first and only Black teacher I had while attending through my K-12 experience, by the name of Mrs. Doris Hargrove. And she was an English teacher. And I remember she taught us the Harlem Renaissance. And I remember the way she would teach us Langston Hughes, Mother to Son. And I didn't want to be in the honors program because there were no cool kids in there, and I wanted to be popular. And she was not having it. She saw what was in me, and she made me stick that out. She went to my home, talked to my mother, and said she signed herself out of the honors program and, told on me. I went home one day, she was sitting at the kitchen table. So because of her, I decided to become an English teacher. I wanted to be just like her. And these were the teachers who wore suits and heels and hosiery and hair in a bun, not the jeans and things. You see where you can't tell whether they're the student or the teacher.
Right.
But I just wanted to be like her. And I did just that. I became an English teacher.
Wow. Now, you talked about how she made you stick it out.
Yeah.
And that suggests difficulty and obstacles, growth. My next question for you is to share some challenges that you faced in your career prior to becoming the superintendent, the person with the scepter, if you will, of decision making on many fronts. What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, so the main one is I lost my hearing.
Okay.
And so what most people can't see about me is I am functionally deaf now. So I read lips, so you can imagine what this pandemic has been like with the mask, trying to understand. And even today, sometimes my staff is talking to me, I'm having an entirely different conversation. And even people, there have been people who have said, she's a really mean person, she didn't speak to me. And people explain to them, she didn't hear you, she's deaf. And it always speaks to me about how judgmental we are about others without knowing what they're going through. And, I saw her out and about, she didn't speak, and I literally did not hear you. If you don't touch me, I cannot hear what you're saying because I have to focus and really look. So that has been the greatest challenge for me. Another challenge is, although education is made up of 80% women, very few Black women or Latinas end up being the superintendent. So I always say to people, be kind to those women in the superintendency. You have no idea what it took to get into this seat. It is hard to ascend to the role. It's hard to stay in the role. And people are much harder on Black women, on Latinas in the superintendency than any other group. And that's not just anecdotal. There is statistical evidence. There have been studies on this about how women in this position are treated.
Is it difficult having a government elected body that you are answering to when oftentimes many of them don't share a history as an educator, but they are still tasked with guiding someone who has classroom experience as well as real life experience, as well as administrative experience. Is that kind of challenging?
Yeah, it's what's challenging is not so much that there are boards of education. It's that we don't take those sort of elections seriously and we don't pay attention. So you have people who are making decisions or questioning your decisions who have not studied. I have 6 degrees. And I don't say that to brag. I say that to say I've worked hard to be here and I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. But I'll never forget Mrs. Bellamy Smalls, one of the board members who I value so much, said to me, just 30 or 40 years ago, you would have been the help. So it's very hard for some people to take your leadership or to believe you know anything, irrespective of the fact that you have a PhD and those 6 degrees. They are going to second guess everything. So it is up to the public to make sure that their elected officials are representing them well.
That's interesting. I didn't know that you had 6 degrees, and was that by choice or by requirement of your vocational pursuits? Is that something that the positions demanded?
So the position demands that you get an administrative license, so you have to have some advanced training, but most of that is because I just love school. I love learning, and if I had lots of money, I would keep going to school.
Wow.
I want an MBA now, and
Yeah.
now that I'm retiring, I'm like, maybe I should go pursue that. It's something I'm interested in, but I'm also interested in public health, so maybe an MPH, but I could stay in school forever. I just love learning that much.
Wow. Wow. So We often receive data that ranks school systems by state and by county. What commonalities do you believe are shared by the American educational model that you would suggest needs to be changed, or maybe not even suggest, you would say firmly, definitively, this needs to be changed? I remember hearing you do a talk, and you were talking about learning models. What would you say is, if anything, needs to be adjusted in the American educational process?
So I would say, unlike other industries, we're sort of stuck in how we attended school. And it's the same as, the old factory model. You sit 30 kids in a room at desk and a teacher teaches, and we absorb that knowledge. I would suggest that there are many different ways to go about this, even the way the school year is set up, the hours of the school day, but anytime we suggest a change, there's tremendous pushback because we only know what we know. Instead of saying, that's a different way of thinking about it, I'm open to learning more about it. But it also shows, as much as we say we value education, we don't value it like we value other fields. So if a hospital administrator said, we are going to change the model of healthcare, we don't push back because we feel the medical profession, they know what they're doing. In education, everyone will come out and tell us exactly what to do, as though we don't have training to make those sort of decisions.
Yeah.
And that's been really hard. Even with the pandemic, people were telling me how many kids to have in the room, how to set up the rooms. So I asked the Cone Health, the president, the CEO of Cone Health, has anyone given you this kind of advice? He said, not one email like this. I received thousands with unbelievable vitriol and nastiness, telling me exactly how I should handle every aspect of the work.
Well, that's probably due to the fact that you are entrusted with people's babies.
Yes,
right?
That does have something to do with it. But it also has to do with, we all attended school.
Yeah.
And so we have an image of what school should be like. That's not necessarily true of a medical profession. Like, everyone hasn't spent time in the hospitals. But I would suggest, even if we did, we would not tell doctors. We would say, we don't like that doctor's opinion and maybe go to another. But we would not tell doctors they don't know what they're doing, or how to set up the hospital and the layout of the hospital, and all of those sorts of things that we do to educators and teachers.
Yeah. Well, everyone has an opinion, right?
Yeah.
and it's always seemingly an inexpensive opinion in terms of it being shared. But you talked about your love of learning, and I'm very blessed. My wife and I are very blessed that our children are incredible students, all of them. I mean, from the eldest to the youngest. You don't have a cookie cutter kind of scenario when you talk about the students that enter a classroom. They're going to be in various different states of mind and desires, interests, and the sort. And so when you say that we are stuck, I think that's important, because you have some kids who are voracious readers. They love to learn. And then other kids are more creative. They're more hands-on. They like to feel things as opposed to, being readers, right? How do we get stuck? I don't think what I just said is revolutionary knowledge. How do we get stuck in a place like education when we know there's such diversity?
Right, and every parent knows that, right? We all know that.
Right.
But there's something about our experience that is sort of keeping us from moving education forward. And then there are the laws that and legislation that just keeps us from moving forward. But I say we have to be innovative no matter what. We're almost in a cage, and I talk about cage busting leadership. You have to bust out of that cage. Even with the legislation, you can always go to your public and get them to help you with getting legislation changed. But you have to show them there are multiple ways of solving complex problems and to reaching different children. Like we have award-winning learning hubs now that are serving as models for public education. The only reason we put the learning hubs in place was because of the pandemic. If the pandemic hadn't happened, we would not have come up with this model where we hold school in the evenings, Saturdays, Sundays, provide internet, mental health support, social workers, help the students make career decisions. We help them with their work and catch them back up. But that happened because of a crisis. I suggest and often talk about don't wait for a crisis. Push on the innovation now so that 100% of the students can be successful. It is not okay to lose even one of them. And I hear too often, well, 60% of them are doing well. Okay, what about the 4 out of 10%? And then there are even the schools that say, we have a 95% graduation rate. Well, 5% of them didn't, and what will the quality of their life be like as a result of not graduating? It is never okay not to have 100%.
That's good. We often hear about, the high percentages, and I think people take refuge in having a high percent of success rate, but not total success.
That's right.
Is that, in your opinion, is that because there potentially is a willingness to say everyone can't learn?
I think it's more about you're okay.
Because it's not touching your house.
It hasn't hit your house.
Right.
And I think when it hits your house, then there's a different feeling. And then I get the calls and the emails about why aren't we doing more? But I always use like the story of the shepherd and the lost sheep. Remember, even though there was only one lost sheep, he left all the other sheep to go find that one. And I said, we ought to be like that in education when a child isn't coming to class. Like, I can't even teach. I can't, something's wrong here. Y'all wait right here. I got to go make a call and find out where Jamal is.
Yes.
We have to be like that in education. That's just not okay to lose them, to leave them.
I'm probably being unfair in saying this, but you mentioned that Jamal was the one that was out there, and that suggests that there is an unspoken inference there. And I believe that we have been made to apologize in our care for those who are marginalized and those who are oftentimes neglected and those who are forgotten. As an administrator, have you felt a calling to reach for that group?
Always. And it's the thing I'm criticized the most about is, well, you don't care about, people will say, you don't care about white students. That's just ludicrous. I do care about them. But most of our white students are doing much better. They are given access to courses. When I got here, 80% of the students in honors classes were white. White students aren't fundamentally smarter than black students. Black students aren't more athletic than white students.
Right.
We have to think about what kind of preparation and access students receive, or the lack of access and preparation.
Right.
And that's how we end up with the outcomes we end up with. And so I love every single student, whether they are the most gifted, whether they're the richest, and I also love the poorest. But just like a doctor would put more care into a cancer patient, a patient that's in stage 4
Sure.
of having cancer, we have to do the same for the students that are struggling, and nobody should be upset about that. As long as everybody's getting a high quality education, and I strive for that every day. I put lots of funding into gifted education. I fight for honors programs and for the arts. At the same time, I spend a lot of time in the juvenile detention center and making sure they have great teachers there and great programs, because you know, the opposite of poverty is not wealth. Brian Stevenson says the opposite of poverty is justice. And justice is making sure that we make up for how they got to that place. Yes, they probably did something wrong, but they're also there because we forget about those students, the students who often have parents who are not doing well financially, are not doing well emotionally, have mental health issues. These students often cannot read, and they end up in the juvenile detention centers. We cannot forget about them.
Yeah. I don't think people would argue that the medical bills of a sick person outpace that of a healthy person.
That's right. That's right.
And so you would conceivably think that it's understandable that more be given to those who are underperforming versus those who are performing highly. Now that deals with a issue of equality versus equity. Equality versus equity. We'll touch on that in a moment when we come back. Hey, Pastor Lisa.
Hey, Bishop.
How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
You know, it's so good to be together with you right now.
Oh, thank you, Bishop.
We are excited because of where we are right now. It's a chance for us to come back together. Yes. You know, the Bible talks about the blessing of togetherness. In Psalm 133 says how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together, in unity. And that togetherness, it does something to people, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Another scripture I was thinking about, forsake not the fellowship with the saints, because there's strength in numbers. And we need that during the perilous times that we're living in. As you have stated in prior sermons, the isolations, being away from one another. And for us to come together and see like-minded kingdom believers, I think it's going to be amazing.
I think so as well. Listen, so many of us have been looking forward to the opportunity for the doors to swing open and to see everyone else together again. We're going to do this with purpose. On April 3rd at the 10 a.m. service, we are planning to have what we're calling the Stronger Together service.
Yes.
Would you join us? Would you make a special effort to come and be a part of this special day? It's going to benefit so many to see your smiling faces. Pastor Lisa's going to be there. I'm going to be there.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say, Bishop, in our closing with the invitation, I wanted you all to know we do it better when we do it together. So we're looking for you April 3rd, 10 a.m.
Absolutely. Don't miss it. Welcome back. I'm so privileged to be joined by Dr. Sharon Contreras, Superintendent of Guilford County Schools here in the city of Greensboro, serving the third largest school district in the Carolinas, in North Carolina. Dr. Contreras, before the break, I mentioned the issue of equality versus equity. I've done a fair amount of research and attended a number of seminars on this matter. I think this touches education in a very special and definite way. Would it be received well as we talked about the marginalized and the underperforming, those who are impoverished, if school districts channeled more resources to those said schools than the schools where there seemed to be so much and such great outcomes? Do you think that that would be a radical approach that would be received, or would it be challenged?
So it's not a radical approach, and it is probably the most recommended approach in education to make sure that you properly fund students and programs. And certainly students who are most vulnerable need more resources. But it is one that receives a tremendous amount of pushback, which is why I say you have to be careful about who's on your Board of Education and that they actually represent the students in the district and are reflective of the students in the district, the demographics of the community, because there are people who are sitting there and are supposed to be advocating for all students who do not. And I don't mean just Guilford County, I mean across the nation. This is a problem that they run for school board because they don't want the very things you're speaking about, making sure that resources are allocated fairly. Fairness means giving students what they need, not giving every student exactly the same thing.
Yeah. I just think that it's an amazingly head scratcher type of argument, debate, because again, you use the analogy of the medical field. Those who are sickly are going to have a higher investment for care. And so let's talk about the national front again. You came to Guilford County from Syracuse City Schools. What are some of the challenges you have faced as a superintendent and beyond that post or beyond that would uniquely prepare you for this other post that you had considered, and that being the Secretary of Education in the great District of Columbia?
Yeah, so that was such a surprise to me, it's a great honor and very humbling to be considered. But I think there were several things. One, my belief and reputation for fighting for equity for all students. Also working on behalf of students with disability. I spoke about my disability, but I wasn't born like this. Although it's hereditary, I could hear at one point, and I thought I was sympathetic, empathetic, and then I learned, once I lost my hearing, how people actually treat you when you have a disability. So I think my work on behalf of students with disabilities, the incarcerated, my work to expand access to gifted programs and the arts, all of that speaks for itself. And so I just tell people, don't try to put yourself out there. Someone's going to notice. People will notice your good work. You don't have to say, here I am. I didn't seek that out. And it's political, of course. They make decisions based on many things, not just your credentials or your work, but do we already have someone from North Carolina? Do we need a secretary from another state to make this more well-rounded? So that all plays into it. But again, I was deeply humbled, and I just encourage people to keep doing the good work, because sometimes you're not valued in your own community, but the rest of the nation values the work that you do, and that's really important to know. Don't feel dejected or feel, wow, I should leave, I should give this up, no one values me. Somebody sees the good work you're doing.
Yeah, so you made me think about the parable that Jesus taught, that a prophet is without honor in his own country. And that is so true. It blows my mind as to how I've seen it manifest and prove true in so many different sectors as I go throughout the nation preaching. It's always that you're received better elsewhere than where you are from. I guess that testifies to human behavior. Speaking about human behavior, we know that the pandemic has forced many of us to operate differently. And the pandemic is still not quite over. We're not as beyond it as much as we would like to believe. But you referenced how you've created hubs in response to it. Do you think that the pandemic has helped in any other ways than what you mentioned earlier about the development of the hubs that have proven to be very helpful?
Yeah, the pandemic has been extraordinarily destructive, but because we had to operate in a different way, it also provided some opportunities to do things differently. So it is only because of the pandemic that we were forced to cobble together enough money to provide every single staff member and student with a device, a technology device. So they have laptops or iPads. That we just kept saying there's no money for it, there's no money for it. But when we had to do it, we found money. We now outfit our buses with Wi-Fi so that students can do homework on the bus, because there's a huge, still in this day and age, and this drives me crazy, there's still a gap in who has high-speed connectivity and who does not. And it's not just a problem of the urban poor, it's a problem in rural areas. When the pandemic first started, a parent called me from somewhere not far from here and said, the cable company wanted her to pay $23,000 to connect in her subdivision. People can't afford that. And in this day and age, it should be a public commodity, not something that everyone has to spend money on. So we were able to give hotspots, and we thought a lot more deeply. We also created a fifth quarter and said no student would get an F at the fourth quarter. If they had an F, they would get an incomplete. But if they came to summer school, that incomplete would become the passing grade, just giving them one more chance so kids wouldn't start acting up or saying, I'm not coming to school anymore because there's no way to pass. But we should have done that all along.
Right.
And we shouldn't, and I can't stand when the adults, and that includes the administrators and teachers, say they had 4 weeks, the 4 quarters, they're kids. I don't care what their bodies look like, they are kids. And thank God that they don't take our house when we forget to pay the mortgage or we're 5 days late.
Yeah.
But I think of our behaviors as adults, but then we want to hold kids accountable and just destroy their lives by saying they don't get another chance. And it's not Christian either.
That's
and I
right.
remind people of that. Like, well, thank God Jesus doesn't think that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, all good things must come to an end, and you're preparing to leave GCS. How do you feel about this departure and this new chapter, and do you feel that you've accomplished everything that you desired?
Well, I have not accomplished everything I desire. In fact, I'm like, I only have 5 months. I got to do this, this, and this. They're like, calm down. I do know, though, that you come for a season, and your destiny is to do a certain thing.
Yeah.
And I believe, changed the way we think about what is okay. And I have hundreds of equity warriors all over the district that are going to fight for kids and not just let us revert back to how we used to behave when it was okay to walk into a classroom, honors classroom, and not see students of color. When it was okay not to make sure that students had all the resources they need, or okay not to call parents to check on attendance. I hope that we have improved, and I know we have improved a great deal. I'm excited about the change, but I'm also sad that 1 in 4 superintendents is leaving the field, just so frustrated, and just having feeling that they have been so beaten down and taken the brunt of the entire pandemic on one human being. And it's not fair, it's not right. No superintendent has the sort of political power to fix the problems in society that existed pre-pandemic or after pandemic, and to put all of the blame on one individual instead of holding the entire community and the General Assembly and Congress responsible for all citizens gives people a pass. Everyone else a pass, and you're putting everything on one person, and you won't be able to have a strong system because you'll have a leaderless system as the leaders just keep revolving in and out.
Do you think that last part that you just spoke about is due to you being the face of the school district, or is it because the public just needs someone to hold accountable? What do you think?
I think
might
for
be?
superintendents, it's both. I also think the public doesn't pay attention enough to why a school system wouldn't have had laptops for every child in the first place. Like, what caused that? What's causing the bus driver crisis? That's not a superintendent problem. That's a problem with how we pay individuals. And the school district does not levy taxes. The school board does not levy taxes. We are giving allocations from the General Assembly and from the Board of County Commissioners. And so why do some school districts, why are they able to pay their bus drivers $20 an hour and we were at $13 an hour? That's not anything a Board of Education or superintendent can fix. And $20 an hour isn't enough to raise a family on.
Right.
We have to demand more of those that we have in positions. Unfortunately, as you said, I'm the face they see. Whatever superintendent is in the community, that's the face they see. And we put all of the responsibility on that one person.
So in closing, what advice will you give the person coming behind you, or an individual who desires to walk your path?
I would say maintain your hope. Let no one take hope from you, because without hope, or where hopelessness exists, injustice prevails. So you must maintain that hope and maintain your joy no matter what. And I've had some rough days, but I am just overjoyed that I was chosen to serve so many families and students, and the community has been overwhelmingly supportive and gracious toward me. And I hope we'll do that for the next superintendent, and I hope that I have touched some young person's life in this school district where they one day will become a superintendent, hopefully a little girl that looks like me.
Amen. Amen. Well, I want to say thank you on behalf of the community, on behalf of our community. We need more examples for our young people to see, because vision is not just something that we carry in the eye, but we carry it in the heart. Mm-hmm. And when you said that you would encourage that person to maintain their joy, the joy, the Bible says, is where we get our strength from.
Yes.
And it's the joy that will keep us, yes, and propel us towards our hopes. And so I say thank you. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for the 5 years that you've served.
6
years. 6 years that you've served. And thank you for continuing to smile through it all. I want to say thank you to our audience for watching us. I hope that something has been said today that has been informational, something that has been said that has also been inspiring. And we pray that you will be everything that God has intended you, Amen, to be. Take care.